Fellas, are we as gamers becoming way too dumb to play video games now? Look, I've been gaming for a very long time now. I would say that for over 16 years of my life, I've been a massive gamer. And I've played all types of titles throughout my life. JRPGs, action-adventure, first-person shooter, you name it. Well, except for sports titles. Sorry, it's just not for me. Anyway, based on my nearly 2 decades of gaming experience, one thing that I can definitively say about games back in the day compared to the modern era is that they were way more difficult to play compared to titles released today. I'm completely serious. Back then, we didn't have any of the resources we have now. There were no YouTube walkthrough guides, there weren't really any online forum sites dedicated to the game, and worst of all, you had to read in order to figure out what you're supposed to do. Like, that's just messed up, man. All that we really had back then were the strategy guides or the player's handbook manual that sometimes came with the game when you purchased it. Other times, you needed to buy it separately. And if you were a broke 5th grader, then you were SOL. You had to hope your parents would get you the exact one you wanted for Christmas or your birthday. Games back then never really held your hand and basically just let you run hog wild and do whatever you want. But the problem was that sometimes it was never clear on how you were supposed to progress through the story, and thus these guides were very useful in helping you get through the more confusing parts of these old titles, especially for the brain of a 10-year-old because it was incredibly easy to get stuck in many of them. Sometimes you needed the strategy guide in order to get through some of these games because of how little they held your hand during the gameplay. I can't imagine how people would have even finished these games if these strategy guides or player handbook manuals never existed in the first place. For example, I went back and played through this one little obscure title released back in 1996 called Persona. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not. It was from an unknown studio called 8 Loose. Yeah, I have no idea who these guys are. Probably just some random unknown indie studio or whatever. Anyways, I played through this a while ago so I could experience what these kind of games were like back in the day, and let me tell you, it definitely shows its age. First of all, it doesn't follow any of the traditional JRPG structures that we all know well and love today. It's actually quite different. Instead of the 4 party member limit that most JRPGs have, this one has a 5 member limit. I know, pretty revolutionary, right? And the combat is based on a grid system where the correct positioning of your units actually matters because most of the attacks have a unique area of effect pattern. This is all well and cool, but the worst part about this game is that it's a corridor dungeon explorer that you have to explore in first person, similar to other old school RPGs such as Etrian Odyssey. But the problem with these kinds of games, and a big reason why they've fallen out of the mainstream, is because they're so exhausting to play. These dungeons become a veritable maze very quickly as the game goes on. The corridors will start to blend in with each other, and the tile sets will all look the same to you. And don't even get me started on the final dungeon of Persona 1. This place was brutal. It has 8 massive floors, each of them having wildly different enemy encounters, and one of them you have to do while essentially blind because of a thick fog. This dungeon was even confusing to me as a grown adult. So imagine how a 10-year-old would feel getting lost in here without the internet, without YouTube walkthroughs, or without any guidebooks because they were a broke 10-year-old kid. It was a nightmare to push through this place, even while reading a guide on my other monitor. And after being through the final dungeon of Persona 1, it made me get a newfound appreciation for the amount of streamlining the gaming industry has gone through in the past 20 years. Gone are the days where we had to solve some really obscure and confusing puzzle without any easily accessible solution in our hands. We've been so spoiled with how much hand-holding games today do for us that most people wouldn't be able to get through a game made even 10 years ago. I remember playing Final Fantasy 13-2 a little while ago, and there was this one god-awful clock puzzle that I just could not for the life of me figure out. Like, the numbers you pick moves the clock hands by that number backwards, and your goal is to have the hands reach every position on the clock to make the numbers disappear. So you have to think like 15 steps ahead in order to figure these out. And even after understanding how the mechanics work, I still didn't really understand how it worked. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part was that it was impossible for a guide to be made for these puzzles because they were all randomly generated. Yeah, this puzzle is completely different every time you reset it, so you can't even find a solution for it if you had all the resources in the world. I don't know about you guys, but I for one am glad that we've moved past this kind of game design in the last 10 years, because this was not it. We always associate the term handholding with a negative connotation because it means that the developers don't trust their audience enough to solve the problems themselves. But is some handholding really a bad thing though? Because I think a lot of people would agree that many games back then were just straight up poorly designed and poorly communicated, sometimes being intentionally obscure for the sake of it. The reason why handholding was a necessary thing to do back then was because these titles were simply filtering out a lot of potential players. No one wants to pay full price for a game they were super excited about only for them to get stuck midway through because some puzzle was too confusing to solve. I get that, it's really frustrating. So in order to remedy this issue, more developers have started to incorporate more signposting into their level design, like the infamous yellow paint or the red barrels. Not to mention the other aspects that essentially tell the player exactly what to do, like quest markers and current objective UI displays. Which brings up the age-old debate that everybody loves: do games really need to use the yellow paint? Well, no, obviously, they can just use the green paint instead. Jokes aside, we might complain about how goofy it looks to paint every interactable surface with a yellow goop because it's completely immersion breaking. And I can understand that argument. I mean, it's hard to imagine that some random guy in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth just so happened to go around and conveniently paint every single climbable surface specifically so the protagonist can use them. That's just kind of a ridiculous thing to believe would happen in this world. However, the thing is that the game needs to be this way. There has to be yellow paint in the game because otherwise, a lot more people would get stuck on simply trying to look for where to go next. And as a consequence, they're more likely to quit because of it. Basically, we become a deer in headlights when there isn't some noticeable out-of-place object guiding us throughout the game. It's so bad now that people don't even bother to read the tutorial messages literally right in front of them. There were a concerning number of people who didn't know that you could actually equip the Luminas in Expedition 33, even though there's a tutorial message about it on your screen within the first 30 minutes of playing. That's the point where we've come to as a society, and it's kinda worrying. Obviously, the best solution to this would be just to communicate your game mechanics better, but that's easier said than done. Developers can't predict how players will behave, or if they'll be able to figure out how to progress throughout the game or not. And instead of scrapping entire levels worth of assets whenever they're not working, the easier way to solve the problem is just to put bright neon signs around every interactable object in the game. And while it does make gaming more accessible and streamlined for a wider audience, it's also conditioned us to not critically think anymore because the games today will just tell us exactly what to do. If you wanted to play a game back then, you had to carefully read all of the text boxes and pay attention to your surroundings because oftentimes they would only give you a hint once, and if you forgot what it said, you were absolutely cooked. Nowadays, in the modern era of gaming, we have everything directly spoon-fed to us. We have quest markers, journal entries, heads-up displays, yellow paint, and the whole collective knowledge of the internet right at our fingertips. We never have to worry about getting lost or getting stuck in a game ever again because oftentimes the game will straight up tell us where to go or what the solution is. This can be better for attracting a wider audience, but the issue with having our games essentially be solved the moment we get them is that the games will stop being about our journey or our story of how we figured out how to beat that really difficult boss or how we solved that really tricky puzzle by ourselves. Now games are about the story that someone else had already planned for you exactly to the T. Every option and every path you can take was already carefully thought out for you by a committee in a boardroom. So games now are just one big theme park ride where you just press the button the devs tell you to press, then the funny things happen. We've been living like this for so long now that whenever the devs forget to add in yellow paint or a giant neon text on the screen ordering us to go from point A to point B, we lose all sense of direction, like that one SpongeBob episode where he completely forgot his own name. I mean, I know for sure that whenever I play a linear game and the objective marker disappears because it's the part where you're supposed to solve a puzzle, then I know my brain will completely shut down and I would not know what to do. That's not to say that there's zero value in linear theme park games though, because they too have a place in this industry. Sometimes people just don't want to have to think too hard whenever they hop on the game. They might come home from a long day at work and just want to sit down on the couch and shoot things or play their sports ball. Not everyone wants their games to be a Rubik's Cube of mechanics and level design all the time. There's value in simplicity because it helps us take a break from the complexity of real life. At the end of the day, games are meant to be fun above all else. It doesn't matter how good the graphics are or how enthralling the story is if you're not having fun, and that's what really matters. If you prefer being more of a casual gamer, then by all means, you do you. I respect that. However, I will say that the satisfaction of being able to solve a problem in the game all by yourself without any guides whatsoever is unmatched. It feels as if you just ascended to another plane of existence. I'm talking about games that require you to turn the cogs in your head and think a little bit in order to win. Titles like Tears of the Kingdom, Baldur's Gate 3, or Elden Ring, where they give you all the tools to solve the problem yourself, but never exactly tell you how to solve them, are so much fun. They're essentially one huge empty canvas, and you're the painter that can paint anything of your wildest dreams. For example, in Tears of the Kingdom, a game where you can build whatever you want so long as it accomplishes the goal. You can either simply create the most rudimentary and basic vehicle that just gets you from point A to B, or you can create a giant explosive death robot that can shoot lasers. It's all up to you how you want to approach these games, and I love the freedom that they give you to be able to accomplish the goal on your own terms and in your own way. But that's just me. What do you think? Do you think gamers are getting dumber? Let me know down below and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content in the future. See ya.